After years of waiting, Dune is finally here. The most influential science fiction book has now been adapted for the screen again. Now, I've been a Dune fan for a little while now. I actually started by being a fan of the original David Lynch film, which is not good, but I like it anyway, so leave me alone.
You mustn't speak!
But that movie did motivate me to read the book, which is one of my favorite books ever. So it's safe to say that I've been very excited for this new movie. Ever since it was announced, I have been a devoted agent of the Dune agenda. And I love Denis Villeneuve's films, and I think he's the perfect pick for this series. But there are some things everybody should know going into this movie. Firstly, this movie adapts about 2/4 of the first book. This is not a complete story, and it does feel like the beginning of a bigger movie. Now, it usually really annoys me when people talk about Dune and they explain it as, it's the Lord of the Rings, but for sci-fi, because that's not really accurate. When people hear that, they expect an exciting action-adventure story with lovable characters, and Dune is not that. Dune is delightfully boring. It is about space politics. All of the characters are extremely unlikable. Most of them don't even have personalities. And there's some action. I think there's like 2 fight scenes in the book, and they're like a sentence long each. But despite all of this, I think this movie does actually make the Lord of the Rings comparison slightly more accurate. This version of the story has a bit more action. Not a ton, but it has a lot more than the original story. It also builds up a lot more tension, and the characters are definitely made more digestible. So yeah, it's hard for me to review this movie as a normal person. My opinion is completely clouded by my love for the series. I have a soft spot in my heart for Dune, and this movie is for people that love Dune. In some ways, this movie is not friendly to people who have no familiarity with the source material. There's an insane amount of detail that is pulled straight from the books. And this movie has a lot of exposition, especially in the first third. And while I was initially put off by this, I think it's necessary, and I think it's actually done pretty well. This world is dense and detailed, and you actually need to know everything if you want to enjoy the story completely. And this movie does a pretty good job at conveying that stuff for you. Considering how much exposition is slipped into this movie at key moments, it's even more shocking when I realize how many details are left ambiguous. This world is so rich, and this movie has a lot of information that they can't fit into one movie. There are mountains of lore, and this is exactly why this movie was thought to be an impossibility. As it stands, I think this movie does a good job condensing the lore to its most important details, but seeing as the first hour or so is just kind of mostly exposition, I can see people getting a bit bored or impatient. But personally, I liked it, and I think this movie has very creative ways of info dumping to the audience. There's a lot of time devoted to making sure the audience knows exactly what they need to know, because this movie is a slow burn, but in a good way. This movie is all about building tension and building up the mythology of this universe. You are constantly told that something bad is coming, and the movie builds up that dread and uneasiness. There is a lot of atmosphere, and the music and sound design do a great job of adding to this atmosphere. Paul's Bene Gesserit powers are accentuated with unearthly sounds and guttural voices, which make all of the scenes of prescient dreams and unreliable fortune-telling even more uncanny. This is a loud and unsettling movie, and I think it needs to be seen and heard on the big screen to get the full effect. And the presentation is further enhanced by the visuals of this film. This movie looks good as hell. The design of the architecture and technology may not be the flashiest, but it is Dune. Dune is cold and stoic, and the design of this film matches that tone perfectly. There is no moment in this movie where you don't have something amazing to look at. To put it in simple terms, this movie is truly an audiovisual experience like no other. It has the best presentation of any movie that I have seen all year. And as for the performances, I would say they're all on point, but again, my opinion is tainted by the book. The book is very Shakespearean, and the characters here are pulling off a modern interpretation of the source material. Like, I could probably say that Timothée Chalamet is lifeless, but he's specifically supposed to be in this role. Paul is inhumanly cold and calculating. So to me, Timothée Chalamet is doing even more than I expected. I think he was pretty good, and he fits for what I imagine Paul to be like. Duncan Idaho is kind of just a normal soldier in the book, and in this movie, Jason Momoa is playing him as Jason Momoa. But I think it works here because he's the most likable character in the movie. His performance adds a lot of heart and charisma that is needed in a modern American adventure movie. I think, however, the best performance comes from Rebecca Ferguson, and I'm biased because Jessica is my favorite character in Dune, but she adds a lot of fear and uncertainty to the role, all without changing any dialogue and without making Jessica too vulnerable. Oh, and also, this is unrelated, but the characters in this movie, touch each other all the time. And once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. You get a touch on the shoulder, or a touch on the chest, or a touch on the back, or a touch on the face. It's not a criticism, I just think it's funny. However, I do think some characters could have used a little more love as far as their writing goes. Not everybody gets a lot of character work in this movie. Baron Harkonnen is in this movie a lot, but his intelligence and personality don't shine through as much as I'd like. He's just kind of here to be scary and nasty, which is delivered perfectly, but I would have liked more of his traits to be shown to us. But the worst treatment is definitely with Dr. Yue's character. This is one of the most important characters in this story, and we don't have a single scene where we learn anything about him before the plot kicks off. In the book, there's a short scene where he talks to Jessica and it establishes his wife and his motivations, and I really expected that scene to be here because it's really important, but there's nothing. And it leads to scenes that kind of come out of nowhere without the necessary context. But overall, this movie pulls off what I thought to be impossible. For a while, I believed that Dune is just not suited for the big screen. And I mean, a lot of people thought that. And this movie proves that it can be done. And it's hard to fully review this since it's just the first half of a story, and it feels very reliant on a sequel that we aren't guaranteed to get. And who knows how well this movie will do. I love it, but I like slow burns. And Dune is simply not a Hollywood blockbuster. It is a thoughtful, patient, introspective story, and this movie pulls that off. And although it is a flawed film, I respect that it is so devoted to the scope and spectacle of this legendary series. But it's not for everybody. You have to temper your expectations, but if you watch this movie on its own terms and you immerse yourself into it, I think you guys will enjoy it. And please, at least just give the movie a chance, because if people don't see it, there may not be a part 2. Denis has literally never made a bad movie, and he deserves to be able to finish this. So I'm going to go ahead and give Dune Part 1 a 9 out of 10.